GLOBIS.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for everyone to come to this panel. And thank you for the panelists to make time to join the panel session here. Today, as you see, we have three of the best experts we can think of when we like to discuss the current status of the Japanese inbound tourism as well as the future potential going forward. And let me give you a very quick intro about what I think about the current status. Number one, we are likely to achieve the growth target of 40 million tourists by next year. But at the same time, we are not achieving the $8 trillion consumption target next year. And there will be a huge gap. And average consumption by inbound tourists remains stagnant at around 150K yen. So it's a big miss from the government's long-term target. And we need to attract more affluent travelers, clearly. Point number two, the remarkable growth in recent years have driven by largely visitors from China and Korea. And today, about 3/4 of the inbound tourists are from 4 nations and regions: China, Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. 3/4. And actually, that dependence has increased over the past several years. So probably we need to diversify the portfolio of customers we are receiving. And experiences matter, especially for the affluent travelers, as well as travelers from outside of East Asia. European people from the States or Australia, care more about experiences. So we need to have a greater variety of experiences, and we need to have a better capability to monetize them. That's the kind of underlying theme I wanted to discuss when we set up this panel. So let me ask Harada-san first to describe how you see the potential, because I understand that your presentation to Mr. Suga several years ago really triggered this aggressive move of the current administration going for the inbound tourism, correct?
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Yeah, so can you elaborate what you discussed then?
Yeah, I still remember that day I presented to Mr. Suga to point out, how big a potential we have a traveler from Asian market. I think that day, everybody in the room was a little bit shocking is because the number. I think, for recently people visit Japan, you will see a lot of Asian traveler walking on the street. Especially like a China traveler. So, how do you think? How many percentage people Chinese traveler coming to Japan? So I always ask this question at the beginning of my speech. A lot of people answer me is around 20% or 30% of China traveler is coming to Japan. I think people agree with that. Actually, the number is 4.5%.
4.5%.
Yeah, so see, still a lot of people are surprised with this number. 4.5% of the Chinese outbound market. So I think 3 years ago when I presented to Suga-san, it was 6%. 6%. It's because the 3 years ago, China outbound population is still a little bit lower than now, and they are growing. But the growth compare their, the people coming to Japan, the growth actually is lower. So now last year was 4.5%. So if we're thinking, and I think President Xi Jinping announced they want to expand their outbound population is going to the 700 billion in 10 years. 700 million in the 10 years. So means if we get 10% Chinese traveler to Japan means we have 70 million traveler. So it's almost 10 times. See, so that's a potential. So the strategy, we must be very clear. So how many percentage we want to the traveler coming from Asia. So we can more, we can less. That will depend on how Japan government think about that, based on the current number now. So to back to your first question, to looking beyond the 2020, I think Japan inbound market different will be growing, keep going in the couple I think 10 or 20 years.
Only with Chinese travelers.
I think not only Chinese traveler. Looking at the Indian travel market is going very fast. Indonesia market will coming together, and also like I think Malaysia, so Southeast Asia. So we still have a lot of growing country in Asia. So not only
I know,
Chinese.
but you are saying that only with the China opportunity.
Yeah,
I think it's
only,
big enough.
Yeah, you're just big enough. Say, yeah, you're right.
Okay, thank you. Hoshino-san, you were heavily involved in the policy development in the early years when we really started the inbound tourism policy. And maybe can you elaborate on what you were discussing then, and looking back from now, how we have achieved the strategy you laid out?
Right. I like to, first of all, one of the things I told the government of Japan in early 2004 and 2005 was too much dependency on one country in inbound business is too risky for Japan. At that time, we were so independent on the Korean market. And as you see, the inbound from Korea, we have a more than 30% drop this year and later, more in probably later this year. So the inbound business is growing and it has a lot of potential, but we need to diversify the source countries. We should target, of course, China, India, other Asian countries, and the US and Europe. Those two are very, very important to really diversify our risk of the business. Before we get into inbound talk more, I just wanted to point out one inconvenience truth about this tourism industry in Japan. As you might know that we are targeting 8 trillion yen, in inbound consumption, and currently it's a 4.1 probably trillion yen inbound. But if you look at the total tourism industry consumption in Japan, we have a market of about 26 trillion yen in this country. The 21 trillion yen is done by Japanese customers traveling domestic markets. So if you look at the growth of the inbound market from 2017, last year to 2017 to 2018, it grew significantly, and government announced that. However, the domestic market going to the visiting Japanese domestic destinations dropped from 2017 to 2018. So look at the total consumption of a travel industry in Japan. It actually dropped from 2017 to 2018. So the industry as a total is not really, didn't grow from 2017 to 2018. And very few people know that. And very difficult to find that numbers in the government announcement. So, but we have to look at it because if we are talking about the employment in the rural areas and the growth of the industries and competitiveness of hotels and resort business in the future, we have to look at the total consumption growth. And we should make a great effort to increase more inbound. But at the same time, we have to think about how we can sustain the domestic Japanese market going to the rural areas. It's not, the drop didn't really, was not the cause of the drop was not population drop. It is a participation drop, especially at 20s, young people compared to 30 years ago, like our age. They don't travel much. So we have to come up with, the government should focus on how we can stimulate that age group so that we can maintain the domestic consumption rate.
Are they satisfied with the experience on the Instagram?
I have there are so many discussions about why they are not really traveling and why they are not really, buying automobiles, and there are so many things they behave differently now. But I think one of the problems of our industry is we don't have good products to attract them to different destinations in Japan for young people. That is probably the reason, I believe.
The lack of good products. David, you were talking about that.
Yeah. Actually, before I get into that, a couple of things to think about. 2 years ago, in 2000 and right at the beginning of 2018, as Hoshino-san mentioned, the government started a campaign to globalize the number of the countries that were providing tourists to Japan. And for the first time, almost since the statistics started, for the last 2 years, Europe and the US and Australasia have had a faster growth rate than Asia for the last 2 years. In fact, last year was actually quite significant. It's 4 versus 12. And that is continuing on this year, and will probably continue on into next year also. So that diversification, I think, is happening. The other thing, you mentioned this issue of the per head spend. Statistically, of course, the per head spend this year will go up, and it will go up a lot.
Because we are having less Korean tourists?
Basically, because the Korean, and it's statistical magic, right? Because actually at the moment, the Korean market is not shrinking that much. It's only down 4% year on year. Probably by the end of the year, it'll be down by around about 15% or so. Somewhere around about that. August will be a disaster. But as a result of the fact that the average Korean tourist spends around about 80,000 yen, and the average European or Chinese tourist is going to spend somewhere around about 200 to 220,000 yen, then statistically what will happen, of course, is that the average will go up quite dramatically as a result of that. One of the other things which doesn't show up in the numbers, of course, in my job with the Japan National Tourist Organization, one of the things that doesn't show up, of course, is the crowding out effect. Because we're running at the moment a campaign in Southeast Asia, China and various other places, to replace, this is one of the things we did a few months ago. Because the number of Korean people coming here was so great, it crowds out, of course, other nationalities, because they book up in advance. And so there was, within the government, there was a movement to say, well, we should try and get over these political problems with Korea and get Koreans to come back. And I argued, of course, well, first of all, it's an enormous percentage of outbound and of people in Korea coming to Japan. Given the historical and other problems, it is too risky to be so concentrated in one country. And so rather than getting more Koreans to come back to Kyushu, you should go out to other places in Indonesia and Thailand and other places and say, well, you could never have booked a Beppu sort of onsen because it was full of Korean people, but now you can get bookings. And of course, rather than being, it's rather like the domestic market, which we see in a lot of these markets, where Kyoto is a very good example of this, where it's actually more and more difficult for Japanese people to go and stay in Kyoto. Because from the average Kyoto hotel's perspective, if you give up Friday and Saturday, which is about the longest that most Japanese tourists are going to stay, if you give them a room for those 2 days, you give up the potentially 2 weeks to a month that a lot of people coming in from South Europe are going to stay. And so we've seen an increasing movement for people to create an inbound to an inbound quota and a Japanese quota, and the Japanese quota isn't opened until the number of inbound people their quota has been filled. Now, a lot of people don't like the idea, but from an economic perspective, it's absolutely the way things should go. The reason, and just to get to your point, to the point here, the reason, if you look at this, is the government has an enormous amount of control over the number of people who come here. An enormous amount of control. I mean, you can't create the numbers, but you can have a very, very significant impact on those numbers. And if you look at it over the course of the last several years, it's gone up by 4 million people a year. And it's not gone up by 3 and then 5, it's gone up by 4 almost every year. And this year it will probably go up by around about 4. And that's not a coincidence.
I see.
Because you can create that by changing the visa requirements and the number of flights and the number of arrivals and the number of ships that are allowed in. It's a very controllable number. The number you can't control, of course, is the total amount of revenue created, because the number of people coming is predominantly a government responsibility, and the amount of money generated is predominantly a private sector problem. And the private sector, very unfortunately, has not responded in the same way that the regulatory authorities, including local government, has. They have not created, the hotels have not been built, and in many cases the product, and I disagree actually with your comment that Japan needs more affluent people. There are actually a significant number of affluent people coming. It's just that we are not getting affluent people, we are not providing them with the opportunity to open the wallet.
I see.
And that is actually a much more significant issue.
Okay. Before jumping into the discussion about experiences and tourism products, can you also share with the audience about what initiatives you have directed or supported the government other than diversifying the customer portfolio over the past several years?
Well, at the moment, we just started this last week. We just started a strategic initiative for all of the main countries that we source overseas travelers from. This is something which I'm working on with JNTO very closely. And what that does is to look at the growth of each individual market over time, to look at the in terms of the various different segments, to look at the potential for how many of those people you want to bring to Japan. And this is, I think, a very it's a very underappreciated but tremendously important part of the strategy, because people have this view that this is sort of happening and it's sort of, they just open the door, the government just opened the door and people willy-nilly are being invited in, and that's absolutely not the case. Because I'm sitting at the moment in the middle of this strategic initiative, which looks at, here's the growth of all these different markets, and obviously you have a choice as to how many of those different people you can market to and bring in. And the choice that you make in each one of those individual segments affects the total amount of money which can potentially be generated. Because obviously you can't get 40 million people from Korea, but as an example, if you've got 100% of your people from Korea, you'd make 100% multiplied by 80,000. And so when we look at this, you look at growth of the overall market, the impact that has on the economics, and therefore you can target not only within individual countries, you can target within individual segments within individual companies and work out what impact that will have on the overall economics. That's an enormous project that we just started, but it fits with one of the other things which I do at JNTO, which is to, rather than just go out there and say, Japan, it says there's mountains and you can go to the beach and there's history and culture and all these sort of generalized stuff. Actually, 2 years ago with Suga-san, he and I sat down and talked about getting a really, really well-developed digital marketing process in place. And we spent enormous amount of money building that out. Nobody seems to know about this, by the way, but you can pinpoint people very, very exactly in that process. And that's one of the things we've been doing. It's been enormously successful, and it's actually what's driving the European and the US experience, because you can get down to into very granular detail, and the response rate is tremendously good. When I started at JNTO a couple of years ago, I always said this to them. I said, you're an entertainment that's what you do at the moment. You're entertaining people with cute stories about jido hanbaiki and these manhole covers and stuff like that. It's entertainment. It's not business. And we've changed that dramatically. Everything has to be focused on, here is something and you should get here and experience it. That's changed a lot. And for my sins, for whatever reason, I sit on every single tourist committee that Japan has. There are an enormous number of these things.
You said 26.
Yeah, 26. Takes up enormous amount of time. And, whether it's from sports to skiing, to the national parks, to culture, history, there's festivals, God only knows what else there is. Sake, of course, which started recently. We just joined that one. And my message constantly is, tourism, which I think to most people in Japan, or at least to most people involved with it, means create a homepage that nobody will ever read, in a language that it's written in the alphabet, but nobody could possibly understand what language it was written in. Create a video that nobody will ever watch, and probably a catchphrase that nobody will ever, that will never get people to move to actually come here. And I keep telling you, tourism is not about PR. It isn't. You need to develop the product. If people can't book it, if they can't spend on it, then however much you create cute films from Denso and other places, it will disappear into the ether, and you may as well just take the money and burn it. And that, I think, that's the message which unfortunately for the last 5 years I think I give out probably at least every 2 days. I make this comment to people constantly wherever I go.
David,
it's all about infrastructure development.
I hear you. Thank you. And let's come back to that discussion later. Harada-san, I want to hear from you about the potential needs of Chinese customers, especially rather affluent people, to open their wallet more effectively. What should we do?
Okay, so I'm trying to be the good cap because we have 2 bad cap today. So try to be more nice with the Japan government or tourism board. Okay, so recently I became the representative for Chinese market. So that's why actually I already moving to Japan 23 years. So my citizen also Japanese. So I don't know Chinese too much. Actually, but from last year, I try to come back to China every month to maybe live there for a couple of weeks to understand what exact their requirements. So based on my experience about Chinese people, I think Chinese people not just doing shopping in Japan. They wanted to spend more other money for other categories, like recently a lot of people thinking Chinese people come here do shopping and the major destination, that's it. But I think it's not true. It's not true. They recently they really enjoy like top Japanese restaurants, and they also want to do some okyo. Shakyo, I don't know how to say in English. So shakyo, something related to cultures, something related to very deep Japan. So, but recently, just as David mentioned, we don't have too many this kind of diversity of the destination to serve people to doing that. So when people success, people will copy. We will have a lot of a copy in Japan, but actually we want to some more diversity, many types of destination,
Unique destinations.
unique destination. So Chinese people, I think, just as Baby said, for example, they actually now recently, I think Hoshima-san also realized that there is a lot of amazing hotels in China. So they come to Japan to want to stay more experienced, hotels, but we don't have. So we don't have, for example, a lot of people ask me suggestion to stay in Fukuoka. Actually, I don't have candidates to answer them, the better hotels for them to...
No 6-star hotels with the global brand.
We don't need 6 stars, but we need something very special hotel. They want to come to Fukuoka. They want to come to Kyushu, but I don't have a choice. I don't have a candidate to let them have a very, brilliant experience. So content is now ready. Is the hotel? I think some bigger, destination. Another one is, I think in another session, people talk about the SNS social network. China is using a total different platform, as everybody knows. So, like WeChat, Weibo, recently TikTok, Red. So actually, Japan people even. I still do a little quick survey at the beginning of my speech. How many people knows WeChat? How many people knows Weibo or TikTok? It's still less like 30% or 40% in Japan, be honest. So in this case, we cannot reach them, reach China traveler. So they cannot open Facebook. Recently, it's more serious. They cannot search on Google, search on Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter. So for them, they only can reach
So
their
in the end, you are
platform.
saying that we need to fix everything.
Yeah,
starting
we
from
don't need to fix
accommodation,
everything.
content, and marketing as well.
I think that belongs to people to make a decision. For example, if my hotel is going to target Chinese traveler, I must need WeChat, Weibo, or something else. But if we are target other country, that's your call, right? So I think the secondary thing I need to point is that the platform is totally different. We really need to think about that.
I want to hear from Hoshino-san about your insight into the evolving customer needs,
Customer
as
needs,
well
yes.
as how
Right.
you have responded to
Right.
those.
What I've been doing is it's not really special to the inbound market. As I told you, the largest segment is the Japanese travelers visiting Japanese destinations. So and that the market, Japan market, is not really growing, and in some age groups it's declining. So what I've been doing is trying to really stimulate that market with the new products or new services or new experiences, and apply that uniqueness just to an inbound market. We are providing basically the same products, both to the Japanese travelers and to the international travelers. We change the language, of course, and we need, but the prices are the same, and products are basically the same. Since the China market is huge, and they have so much pressure to desire actually to visit Japan. So I haven't had any effort of attracting a Chinese market. We just need to have a unique product for Japanese guests, translate it to a Chinese language, and wait for it. And they all come. That was the result for the last 10 years. And what I'm making an effort is I'm trying to make the effort to target the US and Europe and other countries. And that is the segment, I think, that very, very important, but you have to make a great effort to really attract them. And it has a little complicated business matter, but I think that's the way to go for us in the future.
Can you give some examples of your specific efforts to create unique content or destinations?
Unique content and destination. Each region has a different culture in Japan and different food ingredients and different tastes. It's a small country, but we have to. Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, there is a huge market, so we don't need to worry about it. But if it is in Aomori or Hokkaido or Shimane Prefecture and other rural areas, we have to make sure that we are different from all these big cities. We have to provide something unique Japanese elements to our guests so that they spend more time traveling to these destinations, not other than Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto.
And also, even in cities like Tokyo, you opened a hotel called
Yes.
Omo,
and
which is-
Hoshinoya, Tokyo.
yeah,
Yes.
which is focused on really experience
Right.
in the town.
Is it in the town? Yes, Otsuka. We opened a hotel in Otsuka. It's a small room hotel, very unique, reasonable priced. But we are targeting not Tokyo. We are not really welcoming guests who want to explore themselves in Tokyo. We want them to really spend more time in the Otsuka area. So we focus on Otsuka elements. We work with the shops, museum owners, and restaurant owners to really create an Otsuka world on our homepage so that our guests will find a small resort area in Tokyo. That's our concept of attracting people to Otsuka.
Thank you. So let's discuss experiences. And I think this country has abundant potential experiences we can offer. But at the same time, if you look at the statistics, share of entertainment and service in tourism consumption is about 3%, as opposed to the same figure around 10% in many other countries like US and some European countries. So we are not really monetizing the experience products. What should we do? So David.
I want to pick up on something Hoshino-san said there because it's very important. As an ex-analyst, as I've worked with the government on tourism, we've created a very significant amount of analysis on tourism globally and within Japan. And one of the things that comes up in this is people will tell you, Chinese people like to shop, Korean people like to go to eat, French people like to walk, kimono kodo and all this, and they create these, French people like, all 65 million of them all like to do this. All 82 million Germans like to do whatever. And one of the things actually that we found in this analysis, this is an internal thing, but is that actually there is almost no difference between tourists of any nation, of any nationality, anywhere across the world, which is exactly what Hoshino-san is saying. There is no difference between a Japanese tourist and a European tourist and an American tourist and a Chinese tourist, none at all. Because if you take a Korean tourist, for example, and this is where the numbers turn out, if you take a Korean tourist, they're only here for 3 or 4 days. And the average European is going to be here for 2 weeks. If you take 2 weeks worth of what Koreans do in Japan, it turns out to be almost exactly the same as what Europeans do. But because Europeans, because they're so far away, come for 2 weeks, they appear to do things differently than other people. The other difference is that if you have around the world, cultural experiences are generally speaking much more popular amongst younger demographics than older demographics, which I thought was interesting actually. I didn't expect that, but that turns out to be the case. History and culture is much more popular with people in their teens, 20s, than it is with people in their 40s and 50s. And so if you look at the demographics of any given country, and the average age is 50, you will find that they have a very, very heavy bias towards, walking in the hills or going to the beach. And that isn't a cultural difference, it's a demographic difference. So that's one of the things which I think we have to make clear, is that there is no difference. Now, of course, from a presenter's perspective, I don't do this for jobs, so I can say this, but if you do that for a job, you want to stand up and say, well, of course, Koreans are like this and Chinese people, because otherwise your presentation would finish in 2 minutes and you wouldn't, and it would all be over. The other thing which I think is tremendously important to understand in all of that, of course, is this whole role of the experience. Because in actual fact, as Hoshino-san says, the purpose of the experience is not the experience. The purpose of the experience is to get people to stay the night. The purpose of doing all this work that I'm doing on providing explanations for heritage sites is not primarily to get people to understand Japanese culture and history. It's to get them to stay there a longer period of time. And the experience, to that extent, is exactly the same thing. It is not there to get people to have a good time. That's secondary. The primary thing is to get them to be there longer. And this is where things are not going right.
I know. I just launched an NPO called Japan Nighttime Economy Association, together with a few partners from the private sector, including a lawyer who led the effort to change the law about no dancing after midnight. And no dancing after midnight is really an issue in big cities. But what we are working on right now is actually creating some interesting content after dinner in rural areas. And the purpose is exactly what David said. It's not the experience itself. It's giving a reason to the customers to stay over in that area, so that the per customer consumption will be maybe 4 times as much as they who don't stay overnight. So that is.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
And this is one of the things, I've been working with the DMOs on this one, because DMOs in Japan believe that their job is to create home pages. We found that there were 2,200 videos made locally about how wonderful, the local food or whatever was. And when at JNGO we went through to see how many of them were usable, we found just over 100 that were usable. And the other 2,100 were basically useless. Those things, by the way, cost somewhere between 20 and 40 million yen a piece, which I think is is a scandalous waste of money. But one of the things which I think has come out of this is that because so much of the focus is on PR, these DMOs need to be repositioned so that they view their role in life as creating, as Hoshino-san says, creating unique destinations where you can use the Wi-Fi, where you can turn up and there's a toilet and there's somewhere to sit, and there's entertainment at night, and the restaurants, you can pay you can pay electronically without having to go and find a bank which is 20 miles away, so you can go get money so you can pay for things. I mean, this is the sort of nitty-gritty stuff. And I would say one of the things that has been interesting for me is that a lot of the results have been created by a focus on very, very mundane detail. I spent almost 2 months getting the people at Narita Airport, for example, to remove the alien passport signs. It took another 6 months to get people at the Zeikan is the customs and excise. If you happen to be behind somebody from Southeast Asia, you could wait for 40 minutes to get out because they go through every single item of their clothing. And it took a while to get them to say, okay, well, actually, why don't you take them to a different room, like they do in every other civilized nation, and so the line can continue moving. And it's this type of stuff which I think is actually one of the major problems. I spend most of my time doing things like getting free Wi-Fi on the Shinkansen, which was an incredibly painful thing to do.
Thank you. I think many of the audience share the same feeling. But getting back to the experiences, although we said that the experience may not be the primary purpose, but still it matters a lot. And it is about culture, or it is about nature. Especially Harada-san and Hoshino-san, can you have comments on what we should be really doing to enhance the attractiveness of those experiences?
Okay, so be quick. Okay, so actually, before I'm a representative for Chinese, actually I work for TripAdvisor before. So actually we have a lot of data points showing, so before we're talking about the inbound, looking at the domestic travel, so we just talk about the Japan traveler, 80% Japanese travelers thinking domestic travel equals onsen, hot spring. So means nothing to do, only hot spring. So people go to the hot spring and they'll spend one night there. They have some dinner and take many times hot spring. That's it. So that's, I think, the most biggest issue for this country to looking about the experience, except for beside of the house spring, that first thing I think, and I think the culture difference. I be honest, I think a little bit culture difference we have, but totally.
No, I was not talking about the cultural difference. We need to develop culture as a kind of tourism products, so that non-Japanese customers can enjoy as much as the Japanese customers do.
Yeah, I think as everybody understands, the travel industry is a small portion in the past, in the past for Japan country. Now, I still remember 2013, nobody knows TripAdvisor. So every time I just tell them, say, what's the TripAdvisor, what they can do. So people don't have any interest in with traveler. Until I think 2013 or 14, so I think recently, the culture. So how that's pointed back to the first point. Japanese young people really needed more travel, and the experience outside Japan, and bring that come back to the country, and we'll let young people to take more potential, to realize the potential, we'll do better worker for the travel industry, I think. So recently, just like Hoshino-san and David say, people don't travel a lot. A lot of experience and a lot of things, we talk with them. They say, okay, we never know that. Never know, foreign traveler experience this in Japan. For them, it's kind of the first time, a lot of things the first time. But I think they really needed to spend time to travel outside Japan and to bring some content, the new idea, the views, to understand the behaviors first, then serve the, foreign travelers. So that's my point.
It's very difficult to point out something in 1 minute. But okay, from looking at this inbound and tourism industry from rural areas of Japan, not Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, the market has not come to our areas yet. As you see, the Japanese market is stable but declining little by little. 80% of the inbound goes to top 10 prefectures. Top 10 prefectures. So we still have other prefectures haven't seen inbound market yet. So from these areas, the market is not really growing. So there's no the motivation to invest in the new services or new hotels or new resorts or new experiences if the market is not growing. So we need to really stimulate those areas. One way to do it is deregulation. Deregulation is very, very important. Our industry has a long history, and it's really structured, and it's really blocking the new investments in these areas. A lot of regulations limit the business opportunity. For example, the vacation rentals, like Airbnb kind of business, is not still yet, and ride share, like a Uber type of business, is not in our areas. Our taxi association is against the share ride business. However, most of the stations in Nagano Prefecture, my home prefecture, don't have taxi lines in front of the stations. But we have a lot of, the farmers' automobiles available for the pickup and. So I think these regulations, not in Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, but in those rural areas, is one key element to stimulate the market.
Thank you. So let us invite questions from you. Please make it short in 30 seconds, and we'd like to take as many as possible, and then come back to the panel discussion. Anybody, please? Yes.
Thanks for the interesting panel. My name is Gen Fukushima, working for the Rugby World Cup. Since the sustainability is one of the key the topic for entire session, I want to talk about a little bit. I want to hear your perspective about over tourism. I understand, like, as most of them, say like a tourism over, and we have to limit the number of tourism. Any discussion happening around there, or Japan is still in the phase of growing the number of travelers?
Okay, thank you. And other questions, please. Yes, please, Stefan.
Yes, Steve Zerker from Kansai Gaidai University. So I'm teaching students and trying to encourage them to get into the hospitality industry, and as you know, they're not too interested. But in order to meet these numbers, a 70 million number, who the hell is going to be available to service this many? Have you guys thoughts or plans on that? And if I could, just one very quick second question. IR, that's what, 3-4 years down the road, hopefully. How will that impact tourism? I know it's a big question.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Tatsuya Terza from METI. I think the two of you, Hoshino-san and Harada-san, stress the importance of young Japanese to travel domestically. How can you make that happen? Every poster I see in the stations show Yoshinaga Sari.
Great point. Okay, then let's discuss those issues just raised. Over tourism, anybody? Yes, David.
Yeah, over tourism is not a problem that Japan faces, although for those people who are incapable of analyzing numbers, those people believe that that it exists. If you look at the numbers, there are 65,000 people living in Venice, and they get 22 million tourists a year. That is over tourism. Barcelona gets 30 million a year. Japan got 31 million for the whole country. So when people, even if you look at Kyoto, I mean, there are these sort of, these people arguing that Kyoto has too many tourists. They had 8 million last year. It's nothing. It's about the same as the British Museum. It's that's not over tourism. For the sensationalist, I think it's out there, but we're not there. I personally believe that the precise definition of over tourism is too many people relative to the amount of money they spend. If the 22 million people coming to Venice all spent a reasonable amount of money, nobody would think of that as being over tourism. And the real reason that people complain about it is because they don't spend very much money. That's the real issue. And that comes back to what we're talking about. How do you get people to spend money? The other thing which I think is true is that, Japan we've gone from being 26th globally in terms of revenues to, the latest numbers came out 2 weeks ago, 9th in terms of revenues generated. And that's happened in 5 years, basically. It is inevitable that statistically people will always go to the most famous places first. And one of the things which I think is dangerous, and one of the things I spend a lot of time analyzing is, if you were to go to Kiyomizu-dera or Fushimi-inari and a lot of these other places, and you were to design a product for the number of people coming today, you will create too much supply relative to the demand that will be there 5 years from now. So I think you have to look at that very, very closely. I slightly disagree with this point about 80% of people going to the top 10. That's true today, and it's true because of this first visit process. The other reason it's true, of course, is which one comes first. People don't visit somewhere if there's nowhere to stay. And I do agree with that. I mean, there is a lack of investment, and that means that certain places are not getting people. And there is this very bizarre Japanese, mostly local economy view that since nobody's coming here, then we can't invest any money. One of the arguments people say, well, we can only invite people from countries that love Japan. Well, then what about the rest of the globe? It's a very closed mindset that doesn't look for potential. And that, I think, is one of the things, as you say, with the experience thing, it's something that people are not spending enough time on. It's all based on existing data.
Can you also pick up quickly the labor shortage issue for the hospitality or tourism industry?
Well, this is not today's topic, but I think actually the answer to Hoshino-san's point on why young people don't go anywhere, and the problem with the hospitality industry is because the vast majority of young people are earning half of what they would be earning if they were in any other developed country anywhere else in the world for doing the same job that they were doing. And people don't have the money to do these things. And it's a reality. The minimum wage is 2/3 of the rate of most other developed countries.
So that goes back to your discussion about the productivity.
Well, productivity, yeah.
In another book,
yeah.
You may know. Yeah.
And in terms of the hospitality industry, the vast majority of the hospitality industry in Japan is run at the minimum wage. And that's one of the reasons why it's so cheap to go stay there. And that's one of the other reasons why the hotels and ryokan that you go and stay at provide such an appalling product, because it's all based on essentially, semi-slave labor. And if you were to resolve that, then the hospitality problem would go away. This has been seen in other parts of the world. That's you see it in developing countries where people come in and they start offering a really first-class product, and they start paying local people, and it sets off the whole process of economic development. That's what we're missing. People won't work in hospitality because they don't get paid anything to work there.
So we need to make the industry more profitable, productive and profitable, so that we can pay more. Yeah? Okay. Let's go to another question about young travelers. Harada-san, Hoshino-san.
Young travelers. There's we are analyzing the market, Japanese market, which is the largest segment. Again, it's 83% right now of the total tourism consumption, and it will be probably stay largest segment for the next 20 years. I'm going to be retired 20 years from now, so it is a most important market for me. 2025 is a very important year for Japanese tourism industry, because currently the Dankai generation is supporting although it is declining little by little, Dankai Seidai is supporting the travel consumption in Japan. But in 2025, all Dankai generation becomes after 75 years of age. If you look at the statistics, the travel participation rate drops significantly after age of 75. So we have to really stimulate the 20s and 30s to maintain the biggest segment of travel industry in Japan. That's why the young people are very, very important. They are suffering from the wages they are earning in big cities, and the transportation cost compared to other countries in the world is very, very high in Japan. The long time ago, like when I was elementary school students, travel to Shigakogen for skiing was much cheaper because there was no Shinkansen. Shinkansen is good for business people which are paid by the company, and they have to go there quickly and come back. But if you're traveling, you have to pay by yourself, and you have those young people have a lot of time to be on train. So they need cheaper transportations for the money they're spending. So the transportation is another reason why I think is blocking those young people to travel Japan. And we have to do something like Uber, ride share, and all these things will probably benefit and elements to stimulate the young people's travel, new behavior, new style of traveling to Japanese destinations.
Well, that makes a good sense.
So deregulation is so important.
Even for the nighttime economy development, actually the biggest challenge is getting young people out to the street. So the same issue.
To add another point, I think young generation, just I mentioned, so house spring is not a young generation, it's a requirement. So young generation will be more active. Do you want to go outside? Do you want to do some exercise, something like that? So I think recently the adventure tourism is kind of a very hot topic across the world. So adventure tourism will be the very big objectives I think Japan needed to achieve in the next couple years. So that is one key point, how to bring young generation to Japan.
Okay. So David, again, 1 minute comment about IR, please.
Well, this is probably going to kick off fairly soon. I think the 3 places that it will be, that will get licenses will probably be decided fairly soon. And the IR process in Japan has been very thoroughly integrated into the tourist strategy. Personally, it's an interesting position to be in. I'm not entirely sure I would approve of an IR process apart from unless it's actually fully integrated. And so I tend to be against it in principle, but for it in terms of tourism. And the reason for that, of course, is that it creates a new market segment, and it creates a very wealthy market segment, and at the same time it creates a whole load of infrastructure that is not available at the moment. And it's being designed in such a way that, unlike the US, which tends to be sort of the Disneyland, or Macau is another example, just sort of the Disneyland, you arrive at the hotel, you never leave until you leave. It's being designed in such a way that it will actually feed a lot of tourism into the surrounding areas. And there's a lot of work being done on how to do that. One of the great things about this country, of course, is that logical thinking is not perhaps one of the greatest strengths of the media. And so people will say, well, there's going to be all sorts of problems with addiction. It is actually the case that the highest form of addiction available is very, very low minimum participation right in your neighborhood. So pachinko and horse racing. In the UK, in the pub, the slot machines. Those are the highest forms of addiction by a very long way. And IR actually runs at around about 0.03%. So people are looking at this and saying, well, it's like saying, well, you can get addicted to 1 cup ozeki, so you're going to be a lot more addicted if it's Romani Conte. I've never met somebody who got addicted to alcohol on Romani Conte. And that, I think, is, it's a very significant logical non sequitur that people indulge themselves in. That itself, that to me, and skiing are the 2 greatest potential money makers that the tourism strategy will achieve.
And also it's going to be a good gateway for a newcomer, the first-time visitor with high potential. So, any comment?
About the labor issue, we definitely need a quality labor to sustain the hospitality level of Japan. We are famous for the good food and famous for the good hospitality. So we have to have a human resource to achieve that. And again, the deregulation is necessary to bring more people to Japan from other countries and educate them and train them so that they can work with us. At the same time, we have plenty of chances, not in Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto again, in the rural areas. The population is decreasing. Mainly decreasing, we have not we don't have any good jobs for the young people to stay in these areas. So the tourism can help sustain the economy level of these rural areas. So we definitely hire more Japanese people who are willing to stay wherever they were born and grew up.
Thank you very much for the exciting discussion, full of insight. I cannot really summarize it well, but a few takeaways from my side. Number one, there is no significant difference in terms of behaviors or preference by nationality or source of countries. That's important thing. Number two, we don't really need to attract affluent customers, but we need to enable them to enjoy more and pay more. And number three, we really need to help develop the population of young travelers to make the tourism industry sustainable. And number four, in this sector too, deregulation is the key, including things like Uber or rideshare or vacation share, rentals. So, well, thank you again. Please give a big applause to the distinguished panelists. Thank you.